Hello everyone and welcome to what could be the most important game of the second half of the Candidates Tournament. The leader Jan Nepomniachtchi faces Fabiano Caruana. Fabi has the white pieces in this game, and if you forgot what the standings were, these are the standings after the previous round. So Nepo leading with 6 points and Fabi trailing with 5 points, with Nakamura on 4.5 and Rapport on 4. Ding, Duda, Rajabov and Firuja still to score their first victory in the tournament. So if Fabi can grab a full point here in this game against Nepo, that will bring them 6-6, and we will have an incredible race until the end of the tournament. But Nepo still undefeated. It's not going to be easy, but Fabi will of course try. And as he plays e4 here, of course we know that the Petrov defense is gonna be on the board. So e5, knight to f3, and knight to f6. The Petrov defense is on the board, and Fabi challenges the Petrov. He doesn't decline it with knight to c3 like we've seen in the previous video. Knight captures on e5, d6, knight back to f3, and knight captures on e4. We have d4, d5, and the bishop to d3. So the standard classical attack against the Petrov. And what can Fabi do to sort of even challenge Nepo here, to maybe create some sort of an imbalance where he can maybe play for a win, because both Caruana and Nepomniachtchi prepared the Petrov defense for the World Chess Championship match against Magnus Carlsen, to be one of the weapons that are going to be used, and they both know it extremely well. So bishop to d6, we have castles by Fabi, and now castles by Nepo. We have c4, c6, and now rook to e1. This is already starting to deviate a little bit. Here the main moves are knight to c3, queen to c2, and c captures on d5. All of these moves are with the idea of weakening the knight on e4, and so is the move that Fabi plays, rook to e1. So it's the fourth most popular move in this position. Already you can see that Fabi is starting to deviate. Bishop to f5 and queen to b3. The bishop left the defense of the b7 pawn, so we are attacking it. Nepo defends it, and here comes a move that was it was played only once in 2006 between two 1700 players, or rather one was 1650, one was 1700, and that move is knight to h4. So it was played only once, and this is what Fabi brought to challenge Nepo with. So you can be sure that he dug very, very deep and hard to find this one. Usually you just go knight to c3, or you grab more space with c5, or you play bishop to e3, but knight to h4, this is a new one. And it already asks us the question, what do you do with the bishop here? Do you just allow us to capture it, because then you lose the bishop pair? Do you go to g6, then we're gonna maybe capture and you're gonna play h captures, or do you bring the bishop back? And this is exactly what Nepo does. So already here we have a completely new game. In that game that I've mentioned, d captures and c4 was played, but here after bishop to e6, already on move 11, we have a completely new game. And okay, queen to c2, Fabi now puts more pressure on the knight here, and knight to a6. Just continuing development. Definitely makes sense. You want to play a knight to b4, put pressure on the queen and the bishop here. And you could sort of win material here, because if you play bishop captures knight here, d captures, and let's say queen captures, yes, you won a piece, but rook f to e8, and you're going to have a lot of problems, because, okay, you can move the queen, but the rook here is also on the e file. It's a very, very tricky position. For example, queen to c2 or something. There are many ideas here for black, like bishop to f5 attacks the queen, attacks the rook, and although you can trade, for example, captures, now your queen is hanging, and there's the threat of checkmate. So it's a very, very unpleasant situation. You have to defend. For example, queen d2, even bishop to c2 can be played, and this is just very, very annoying, and of course you don't want to allow stuff like that. So you cannot win material here, but you can play a3 and say, okay, your knight on a6 will look a little bit weird, and it will take some time for you to reintroduce it into the game, but Nepo just plays f5. He maybe doesn't know this exact position, but he knows the similar ones, and f5 is a useful move in most of them. So c captures on d5, c captures, and knight to c3, and here we have rook 8 to c8 by Nepo. Also interesting here, as Fabi definitely prepared for this as well, is knight back to b8. Point is that after f3, which of course Fabi wants to play in all lines. We are just going to ignore him. We're going to play knight to c6. We're going to sacrifice the knight here, because if you accept this, then f captures. We're going to play knight captures on d4, attack the white queen, and after the queen moves, f captures on e4. Yes, we've sacrificed a piece, but we've grabbed so many pawns. We have this massive center here. We have the bishop pair. Black is the one to be preferred here. So basically what you would have to do is not capture the knight, but play something like a bishop to e3. Then we're going to trade captures, and the game continues. So most likely this is what Fabi had in mind. Black is perfectly fine here, but of course that is to be expected with this weird knight to h4 move. So it's a gambit. Whether it pays off or not, we'll see. So rook 8 to c8, and now pawn to f3, finally attacking this knight. And this is the first moment where Nepo really started using his clock, and he did not move the knight. You could move the knight and it's perfectly fine. For example, you could play knight captures on c3, but he goes bishop to e7. He says that knight is still looking weird there, and I'm gonna use it to my advantage. And Fabi just instantly played pawn to g3, saying this is all well within my preparation, which can also be confirmed by the situation on the clocks. Fabi is an hour and 55 minutes on the clock here, whereas Nepo already dropped to 1 hour and 15 minutes on the clock. So knight back to d6, and this is the move that Fabi did not check, or maybe he did check it, but it's not the one you would expect here, because probably what Fabi had in mind is, well, if bishop captures on h4, then white really has nothing to worry about. Yes, you ruin white's pawn structure, but after knight captures on c3, b captures, there's this very nice queen to c6 move, and you don't have to worry all that much. Okay, you can't go after this because the bishop is hanging, but you know, it's a nice position. Bishop to f4, and Fabi is enjoying this position. So it doesn't matter that the king side is shattered. This is perfectly fine for white. So that's one thing, and the other one is after this g3 move, the absolute best for Nepo is bishop to f6, and this is also probably what Fabi had checked, where he will win the knight here. F captures, and bishop captures on a6, ruin the queen side. Bishop captures on d4 with check, bishop to e3, for example, captures, and b captures on e6, and you get this position where again everything is perfectly fine, but you know, it's only if Nepo spots all of this. So this would be the absolute best that the engine has to recommend. But Nepo plays knight to d6, and this is now where Fabi first starts spending some time. Still, Fabi almost 2 hours on the clock, like an hour and 55 minutes, and Nepo already down to an hour. And here just queen to a4, offering a queen trade, and this is again very, very annoying. Fabi spent some 30 minutes for this move, but it is the absolute top move recommended by the engine. And the problem is, if you trade queens, which seems like a good idea for black, because you know, you got surprised out of the opening, maybe you'd want to draw with the black pieces, it's very, very hard to play. For example, king to f7, you're going to play bishop captures on a6, b captures, and now knight to c5. Put pressure on this bishop here, and there is no way to defend the bishop. You can't defend it, you can't move it anywhere. So the only thing left is to give up the exchange with the rook captures here and the d captures on c5, leaving for a very, very complicated endgame. For example, knight to c4, and now whether you're going to play b4 or you're going to move the knight and then bring the knight over to here to put more pressure on the e6 pawn. So all depends on what black plays, but Fabi would very much enjoy playing this position. But Nepo does not give him this opportunity, and he goes for bishop to f6. Another very interesting line is rook to c6, just stopping the queen trade, but also adding the rook here, so you don't have to mess up your pawn structure. And now if bishop captures, we're going to play bishop captures on h4. If g captures, rook captures here, and now, okay, you can trade, but now everything is perfectly fine. You have an intact pawn structure on the queen side. Fabi's king side is ruined a little bit, so it would be very much playable. But okay, here we have bishop to f6, and this is basically where the game truly begins and where Fabi will be trying to get some chances. So queen captures on d7, bishop captures, he goes for a queen trade, knight captures on d5, and bishop captures on d4 with check, king to g2, and now rook c to e8, as Fabi's threatening knight to e7 check to pick up the rook on c7. So rook c to e8, and now bishop to f4, putting pressure on the knight here, and Nepo just plays knight to c5, so attacking the bishop. And the trades, although they could work in white's favor, they really don't here, because if you just start trading, bishop captures, knight captures on d3, bishop captures on f8, knight captures on e1 comes with check. And after the king moves, we're going to play king captures on f8, and you're just up a full piece. Of course, this is completely winning for Nepo now. So after knight to c5, we have knight to e7 check. Makes sense, as you are also preparing to capture the knight here, but this is what Nepo found. King to f7, just playing spectacular defensive ideas. And the problem for Fabi is that now Fabi is lower on the clock. He has 37 minutes on the clock, Nepo some 40 minutes on the clock. And what is this sorcery? Can't we just do something about this knight here? What's happening here? Well, if you go for this bishop captures on d6, it's not really all that impressive, as your bishop here is also hanging. Knight captures here, attacks the rook, and we kind of go back into the line that we've already discussed. So here, after king to f7, Fabi played bishop captures on f5, but the actual strongest idea is bishop to f1. Looks weird, but now that you see it, of course you believe it, as the rook is coming to d1 and there are all of these targets on the d file. It would be very, very annoying to defend this. With absolute perfect play, you will find knight to c8, but still, it's not going to be pretty. Knight captures on f5, bishop captures on b2, rook attacks bishop, bishop captures on f5 now, knight captures on f5, and rook captures on e1. Rook captures, and now rook to d8. You get this position where, okay, it's equal material, but white will always be better due to the active bishop pair. Bishop c4 check, and it's already very, very unpleasant for that black king. King to f8, rook e2, not allowing any rook lifts from black, also putting pressure on the bishop. For example, bishop f6, h4, then g4, g5, g. The pawns just start marching forward, and the king is in a very, very tight spot here. So this would be the way to put the pressure on Nepo's position. But Fabi misses this. He's already getting very low on time. He plays bishop captures on f5, and now Fabi has only 19 minutes on the clock. Nepo has 40 minutes on the clock, and there are still 16 more moves to be made to reach time control. And here just knight captures on e5. And this is, again, the correct way to play. If you go for rook captures on e7, then, of course, bishop captures on d7 is just deadly. Even if rook captures on e1, we just play rook captures on e1, and now bishop captures on f5. Bishop captures on f8, and now bishop to e6. We save the bishop, but now bishop captures on c5. Bishop captures, and you can see that white is, of course, completely winning here. White is up a pawn and also up the exchange. So, knight captures on f5 is definitely to be preferred here, which is what happens in the game. Now comes knight captures on f5, bishop captures on f5, knight captures on f5, and a whole lot of captures here. Rook captures on e1, rook captures on e1, and the knight to d3. And after this capture fest, Nepo finds the absolute strongest idea, attacks the rook, attacks the bishop, and there isn't all that much for Fabi to do here. That's the problem. Rook to e7, although it looks spectacular, doesn't really do anything, because we're just going to play king to f6, and now you can't go for the bishop as we captured the rook, and if bishop to d6, which seems like a kind of a good idea, there's rook d8. And nothing works here for white, really. Knight captures on d4, rook captures on d6. You can capture on g7, or rather on g7. Because if now king captures, knight to f5 check will pick up the rook, and if rook captures on d4, then we go into this rook captures on h7, knight captures on b2, rook captures on b7. Fabi would have 3 pawns for the knight, but it is not a serious attempt at winning. Or rather, you could play this like if your life absolutely depended on it. It's the best chance you would get, but it's also the best chance to completely drop out of the race if you give Nepo a full point here. So rook to e4, let's not forget Fabi is also low on time. Bishop captures on b2. Now bishop to e3, not allowing this trade. Bishop captures on a3. Bishop captures on a7, and now rook to a8, attacking the bishop here. Bishop to d4, and bishop back to f8. And here, rook to e2 by Fabi. Here, Fabi could force a draw here with bishop captures on g7, but he is down to 2 minutes, and he doesn't find the instant save. For example, rook e7 check, king to f6, and now rook captures on g7. Again, you give up the knight for some pawns here. Rook captures on b7, king g6. Now you have these 3 pawns here for the knight, or rather 2 pawns for the knight, but still, it's a draw. But okay, rook to e2 was played, giving Nepo the opportunity to now maybe play for advantage, and he does. g6. Now bishop captures on g7 is no longer an option, and Fabi has to find a unique set of moves. He only has 2 minutes to play 8 moves to reach time control, otherwise he's just busted. So knight to e3. Let's not forget Nepo has the passed b pawn. Rook to d8 attacks the bishop, and bishop b6 attacks the rook here. Here Fabi of course knows how to hold this perfectly well, but you know, one relatively weird move from Nepo could go a long way, as Fabi is extremely low on the clock. So rook to d6 attacks the bishop, knight to c4. The rook to e6 is coming, so you don't want to allow this, and you also have to defend your bishop, so knight to c4 makes sense. Rook to c6 attacks the knight, and now rook to e4. We have bishop to g7, and now pawn to f4. Rook to e6 offering a rook trade, and king to f3 now. Knight to e1 check by Nepo, king to e3, knight to c2 check, king to f3, and now knight to e1 check. And here, by playing knight to e1 check, both players have now reached move 40, time control has been reached, additional time has been received, and it was in this position on move 40 that Fabiano Caruana and Nepomniachtchi agreed to a draw, as there is nothing more to be done here. It is equal material, and of course both of them are well aware that you know, one will not defeat the other in this position, and it's better to you know, look for a fight on another day. So yeah, that's the game. Hope you guys enjoyed it. Really a tough one. Fabi really did well to spot it. I mean, to prepare this knight to h4 move. Like I said, this move is nowhere to be found in engine recommendations. It has been played only once in, like I said, in a low-level game in 2006. And this is what he had to come up with to try and surprise Nepo in the Petrov, because Nepo is immortal basically in the Petrov defense, and this was maybe one way to ask some questions and to pose some problems, but Nepo, you know, he, even though Fabi is the one who surprised Nepo, in the end it was Fabi who was in time trouble. And I mean, it's just incredible how quickly Nepo adapts to these new positions and just, you know, finds his way out of all the chaos. Really incredible stuff with the black pieces. So yeah, that's the game. Hope you guys enjoyed it. Nepo retains his 1-point lead ahead of Fabi going into round 10. So we'll see what happens next. I would like to thank David Kimura, Stephen McNeil, Bidao Bid is the one, Daniel Schmidt, and Ultimate Poker Coaching for a contribution to my channel. Thank you a lot. I really appreciate it. As usual, you can check 2 of my previous videos here. Thank you for watching, and I will see you soon, continuing the coverage of the candidates until it finishes. So thank you all. I will see you soon, and have an excellent rest of your day.